hold this. Don't touch anything. Sergeant Rutledge shoved the rifle at Avery like dead weight. Laughter followed. She was no sniper. Just a gear mule. 880 meters. A speck of a target. The unit's best had failed. Twice. The brass was ready to quit. Then Avery asked for one shot. Just one. Silence fell across the range. What happened next would be remembered for years. The girl they told to just hold it was about to rewrite history. Before we begin, tell us where are you watching from, and if you believe honor and courage still matter, help keep their legacy alive. The desert swam in heat. Mirage turned straight lines to wave. Avery Calder lay behind the XM9 skyline, cheek pressed to wood. Headset hissed a voice, clipped and cold. Wind shift in 10. Fire or pull back. She tasted metal and sand and the old taste of grief. 4 hours earlier, the base had been a different kind of furnace. Sergeant Blake Rutledge shoved the rifle into her hands like an order. "Hold it. Don't touch a thing," he sneered, loud enough for others to hear. Avery felt the weight differently than he meant it. Her father had taught her how a rifle sits on the shoulder, how it becomes a part of you. Luke Calder had taught her to read wind in mountain hollows long before the Army taught tests. The men laughed. Small noises of poker faces and pride. Captain Dana Whitcomb clipped through the plan 2,880 meters. Clean impact required. Rutledge volunteered the first shot. Chest heaving with false bravado. He missed. Numbers were fed. Knobs turned. Micro adjustments argued. He took a second round. Missed wider. A technician muttered about mirage compensation and algorithm drift. Avery's eyes were on flags stuck like knives in the sand. Each banner moved in a different tempo. Each told a story. Dust devils spun across the valley and then vanished. When Rutledge handed the skyline back, his fingers brushed a seam she'd already noticed. Avery's thumb found a hairline scratch on the adjustment cap, fresh, deliberate. He didn't clap the weapon into her hands kindly. He passed it like a loaded insult. Her pulse did not betray her. She had seen things like this before, tools sabotaged. Pride wounded into cruelty. Her stomach turned cold in a way the Arizona sun could not reach. "Doctor." Lila Kincaid bent close to Captain Whitcomb and whispered, "Auto compense fights the manual input. They're canceling." Rutledge barked a remark about kitchen lessons, the one cruel line, and then silence. Avery kept her face blank and let the calculation begin. She did not reach for the adjustment cap to fix the scratch. Instead, she noted at the offset, the microscopic drag it would add to the turret. She ran the mental math like a familiar root drift degrees, pressure gradients, tumble from heat columns, behind her shoulder. Staff Sergeant Noah Briggs watched with eyes that had already measured what she was thinking. Briggs was an older breed of shooter. He didn't laugh at Rutledge. He watched the flags and listened. His nod at Avery was small, private. A single vote of faith in a place built on ego. Technicians started stowing cases. The day's window was closing. Target 7 Delta waited, a small glint at the far edge of the proving ground. The brass wanted a confirmation and not a story about failure. Avery rose to ask for one attempt. Her voice was steady. "Request one shot, just one." The room tightened. Rutledge's laugh was a brittle thing. Colonel Everett Shaw stepped forward, hands clasped like a judge. He watched her, not with pity but with calculation. He nodded once, and the permission landed like a verdict. She lay down. The rifle settled into the dirt like a familiar animal. First, she cut power to the skyline's assistive optics. The display blinked black. The hum of electronics died. She rolled the adjustment cap with 2 fingers and felt the drag against the scratch. For a second, everything crowded the desert. Rutledge's smile, the soft memory of her father's hands on her shoulder when rain had soaked through their jackets. She did not think revenge or triumph. She thought only of the moment the bullet met air. 3 small clicks for elevation, 2 for windage, 1 to compensate for that tiny scar on the turret. Her breath slowed. She tasted cold, though the heat pressed down. Flags trembled in a rhythm she'd mapped in her head north. East. Settle. 10 seconds. 5 seconds. She exhaled half and held the rest. The trigger broke smooth. The report cracked. 2 heartbeats wrapped the world. Then a tiny plume rose at target 7 Delta like a dropped match catching. Data flashed on a monitor 2880M. First round, direct impact. Silence rushed in loud. Not the silence of victory. The silence that arrives when a ledger is balanced. Rutledge's face turned gray, the color slipping out like paint. Briggs breathed out and, for the first time that day, let a line of respect form between them. Avery clicked the safety on and sat back, forehead to the stock. Her hands trembled, but not from adrenaline, from the shape of old things settling. The rifle had almost been robbed from her by petty jealousy. She had fixed it with nothing but touch and memory. She did not speak of her father then. She did not need to. Everyone in that shade of quiet understood this was not just a test. Some records are not broken for medals. They are broken to close a ledger you keep alone. A single line of instructions popped on a laptop screen. Captain Whitcomb read it and exhaled. Document the shot. We move forward. No speeches. No public gloating. Avery stood and walked away with the rifle like a thing reclaimed. Behind her, a small voice in a headset asked the question no one wanted to say. Do you always see wind like that? She did not answer with words. She only kept walking, and the desert held its breath with her. The mess hall smelled of coffee and gun oil. Colonel Shaw sat with Dr. Kincaid, their voices low, eyes tracking Avery as she entered. That wasn't luck, Shaw said, sliding a folder across the table. At the doorway, Sergeant Rutledge appeared, jaw set, a complaint clutched in his hand. He slapped the papers down, words tight, protocol violation, unauthorized firing. Shaw didn't rise, didn't even flinch. 0900, my office, bring your integrity with you. The room went still, tension humming under fluorescent lights. Later that morning, Rutledge stood stiff before Shaw's desk. He had rehearsed every word, but none landed. The video from the range spoke louder than his accusations. Shaw cut him off before the rant could spiral. You're done here, Sergeant. Report will follow. The door closed on Rutledge's silence, the sound of defeat louder than anger. Outside, Avery received a sealed envelope. Her name typed bold across official orders. Assignment U.S. Strategic Marksman Program, Fort Moore. No speeches, no applause, just a path opening where the desert had tested her. She folded the orders into her pocket and walked on. Fort Moore was different tall trees, humid air, endless ranges carved into pine. Here, arrogance was currency and every bullet spent it. 20 candidates, 3 open slots. At the 400-meter line, eyes turned to Staff Sergeant Noah Briggs. Grouping King, they called him. A man who could carve circles into steel. He smiled with the ease of someone who had nothing to prove. 5 rounds. Avery slid into prone, her cheek pressed to stock, breath steady. Each trigger pull cracked like a metronome. When the dust settled, her shots measured under 2 inches, a cluster so tight it looked printed. Not fired. The murmurs behind her carried disbelief. Briggs stepped forward, relaxed but sharp. 4 rounds near perfect, the crowd nodding approval. Then a sudden gust swept across the line. Branches on the eastern tree line bent first. A warning, subtle and quiet. Avery had seen it, Briggs had not. His last round slipped wide, just enough to show. He lowered the rifle, muttering a curse. Then his eyes tracked back to the trees, and understanding lit. Their gazes met hers, calm. His grudging. No banter, no excuses. Only the silent weight of respect exchanged. The next test stripped them down to lungs and grit. A half-mile sprint in full gear, mud dragging at boots. At the end, weighted steel plates set at 240 meters. 30 seconds to fire. Heartbeats pounded louder than the countdown clock. Candidates stumbled into prone, gasping for breath. Avery slid into position, sweat freezing on her neck. She steadied the rifle, exhaled, and let the world narrow. The timer bled red, seconds falling like stones. With 7 seconds left, she squeezed. The round slammed true, target quaking against the strike. Observers exchanged glances, nods sharp with approval. The review board pulled her file within the hour, charts lit up with a pattern no machine had flagged. Wind rivers. They called it streams of air only certain eyes could track. She hadn't learned it here. She'd learned it in Idaho valleys, under her father's watch. Pressure, hunger, storms training disguised as survival. Evening fell heavy across Fort Moore. The corridors echoed with footsteps, recruits drifting back to barracks. Avery lingered. Sweat dried into salt on her collar. At the far end of the hall stood General Marcus Ellington, his presence unmistakable, the kind of man whose silence carried orders. He waited until she reached him. His words were few, his eyes cutting. Task Force Orion needs a shot that isn't supposed to exist. The message landed like stone, reshaping the ground beneath her. No more tests, no more proving rooms or scoreboards. This was invitation into shadows where failure was death. The hall lights flickered once, throwing long shadows down the walls. Avery didn't answer with questions. She only nodded, breath steady, and stepped into the silence that followed. The transport's engines hummed low, red lights painting shadows across the cabin. A 3D projection hovered in the air, showing jagged mountains wrapped in snow. At the center, a compound glimmered glass walls, steel roof, armed guards pacing. The briefing was simple, brutal. Target would remain inside for only 36 hours. The shot, 730 meters, through a narrow seam in reinforced glass. There would be no second chance. The man had built his fortress on arrogance. He believed the mountains kept him untouchable. The march began before dawn. Boots bit into ice, breath steaming in the air. Every step carried weight rifles, optics, and silence. The higher they climbed, the thinner the air cut into lungs. Loose stone shifted under knees, sharp enough to slice fabric. Frost clung to lashes, turning blinks into grit. Doubt flickered in the team. One operator whispered, "She's never done this in combat." Avery's answer came short. Flat enough. Her pace never faltered, eyes fixed forward, shoulders squared. She carried more than a pack up that ridge. By late afternoon, the valley spread out beneath them. The compound lay below like a chessboard sealed in glass. Smoke trailed upward, vanishing into wind. Through his spotting scope, Briggs traced currents across 3 ridges. Wind slammed the north face, bounced to the east, funneled back center. A loop of invisible violence. Avery counted under her breath. 48 seconds, 55. The rhythm held. The lull between cycles stood out like a heartbeat. She marked it with a scratch in her notebook. Briggs caught her eye, voice low. Got it. There was no disbelief in his tone now, only the recognition of someone watching a puzzle solved. The others shifted uneasily, waiting for their window. The hours dragged cold. Patience was the only currency they could spend. Fingers cramped around scopes, eyes burned against wind. Then movement. The target walked toward his office, guards peeling off like shadows. The door closed, leaving him alone. Through the scope, Avery tracked him to the east window, exactly where the seam cut the glass. Her pulse slowed into silence. Wind cycled again, reaching for its quiet center. The flags below paused in unison. It was time. Her body folded into the rifle, a single shape of steel and breath. Reticle kissed the seam, crosshairs steady. She exhaled half, held the rest, and pressed. The skyline barked. The bullet's arc stretched across valleys, unseen but certain. Time collapsed into a single thread. Glass shivered. The figure dropped backward, chair toppling. The radio whispered in her ear, "Target down." There were no cheers, no fists raised, only the sound of breath released into frozen air. Extraction began at once. The rifle was broken down, each piece wrapped in cloth. The spent casing vanished into a pouch. Boot prints were brushed out with pine branches. Snow fell into grooves, erasing the trail. The ridge returned to silence. Avery zipped the case shut, gloves stiff with frost. The wind shifted again, curling in its 3-beat rhythm. She watched it with something close to recognition. It was the same pattern she had learned as a girl. on Idaho flats. Her father had forced her to shoot in storms, cold rain, stone fields, wind that never repeated the same way twice. She whispered into the mountain air, "A private confession. I see it now. Dad." The words vanished into the storm, but the meaning stayed. Then she turned, joining the team as they melted back into snow. No mark left behind except the weight of what had been done. The mountains kept their secrets, and so did she. Back at Fort Moore, the air felt different. Not desert, not mountain, just the heavy calm of routine. Avery walked the corridor toward the review board. Colonel Shaw sat with Dr. Kincaid, signatures already drying on her papers. "Effective immediately," Shaw said. "Your U.S. SMP, official. No speeches, no ceremony, just the weight of permanence." In the training yard, Briggs leaned on a railing. "Next time," he said, grin tugging, "I'll spot for you." She let the corner of her mouth curve back. Justice came quietly. An internal memo circulated Rutledge reassigned to Fort Irwin. Inventory Division. No salutes, no send-off, just a clipped line in an email. A single image showed his old nameplate dropped in a cardboard box. No one laughed. No one gloated. Sometimes, silence cut deeper than ridicule. Avery read the note once, then closed the file. Her focus lay elsewhere now. The desert had given her a voice too sharp to waste on grudges. 2 weeks later, she stood before 30 soldiers in a lecture hall. Faces from different branches, some older than her, all skeptical. Her slide read thermal tiers, visual proxies, vegetation tells. She pointed to a diagram of distorted light above ridges. "This isn't in manuals, but it's real." Pens scratched. Doubts simmered. The back door opened. General Ellington paused, gaze sweeping the room. 3 impossible shots in 12 months, he said flatly. "Add it to doctrine." He left without waiting for applause. The silence that followed was heavier than any ovation. Every eye swung back to Avery this time, wide open. Recognition spread beyond training grounds. At Yuma, a new long-range facility neared completion. The plaque already bore its name, Luke Calder Range. She saw the announcement on a printed bulletin, fingers brushing the ink. The letters carried more weight than steel or stone. Her father's name would stand where wind carved legends. That night, she opened a small wooden box in her quarters. Inside lay a dog tag, edges worn smooth by years. Beside it, a photo, 2 figures on an Idaho ridge, rifles in hand. Her whisper was barely sound. "Dad, I can see the wind now." The memory lingered in the stillness. Unbroken. Her phone buzzed against the desk. A new message, stamped with Task Force Orion's insignia. Attached a satellite image of desert turbines, spirals of air bent across the sand. Chaotic and brutal. She studied the pattern, pen scratching arcs across the printout. Arrows converged on a single fragile seam. Her fingertip pressed the point, a mark where no bullet was supposed to land. Her breath steadied, not surprise, not fear, just recognition. The screen went dark in her hand. The room held its silence. Beyond the walls, another storm was already building. If you enjoyed the story, consider sending a super chat to help bring more stories like this. Now, click on the video on the screen to hear another story that's just as powerful and captivating, with courage, sacrifice, and a choice that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about duty and justice.